All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland, and our guest is Shannon Bradley Byers. I assume I said that correctly. How are you doing this evening?
I'm just great. How are you? And you did say it correctly.
Oh, good, good. Yeah, so paranormal genealogist. How do you get a title like that? I assume half of it's from going to school for it, and the other half of it is from putting two things together.
Well, none of it's for going to school for it.
All right.
Um, it's I started paranormal stuff way back in the 70s. I started genealogy stuff way back in the 80s, and in the 90s and early 2000s, I learned how to put the two together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I started investigating residential homes, one of my things is I don't like going in cold. I like knowing as much history about the city, um, the county, the city, the house, the land where the house is.
Mm-hmm.
So when I would get done with an investigation, when we would do the quote unquote reveal, the homeowner would get a booklet that had all the documents that I had dug up on everybody that had ever lived in and around that house. If it was Civil War related, they got Civil War records. If it was, War of 1812, they got those records. They get copies of all the land deeds that I went and looked for. So they basically got a little mini genealogy thing with it, along with whatever we had found in the investigation.
That's very cool.
And I started a blog years and years ago. And one of my friends, I was looking for a name for it. And he's actually the one who named me the paranormal genealogist because I couldn't come up with anything that sounded cool.
Right. Well, he did you a favor. It does sound cool.
He did. He did. I mean, I am very fortunate because the couple that I had liked were already taken by somebody else, people that were combining research and paranormal stuff. So,
yeah, the genealogy aspect of it, when I assume that for the most part, the internet has made that easier, but it also would possibly create a situation where a lot of paperwork fell by the wayside and was kind of thrown out and like transferring notes from one book to another, you get rid of the ones that you don't want. Was anything lost in that transfer?
No, not that I've noticed. I mean, it's, when I started doing actual genealogy research, computers didn't exist. So I learned to do all the research old school, going to the courthouses, going to the libraries, going to historical societies, the archive, national archives and places like that, and learning how to read microfilm. And I guess one of the things I've been blessed with is that I can read old handwriting. I have no problems reading, all those old court documents. And
That
so
is a
that kind
blessing.
of
My aunt will send me a birthday card, and I have to have my wife read it to me because
I have similar things. So that kind of got me into working with local historical societies where I live and transcribing stuff for them when they wanted to print books or when they wanted to digitize stuff and be able to put it online and have the transcript so your normal everyday person could read it.
Mm-hmm.
But the advent of things like the genealogy websites and all the historical societies that are digitizing stuff, they don't have everything up, but if I need something from Washington State or I need something from Louisiana, I don't have to go there now to find the actual documents that I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't noticed that it being online is a bad thing yet. It's just not everything is there.
Right.
Because a lot of places, they don't want to put their stuff online because they want people to visit their low, whatever archives or museum that they are to get people in there to see their stuff. So they won't put it up online. So some stuff is hard to find and some's not.
That makes sense. That actually makes sense. I'm here in Ashland, Oregon. I haven't been here too long. I'm from Redding, California, and down south, and we had the Shasta Historical Society, and it was always there and full and active, and I assume that's the sort of place that you go to, is this historical society. It's full of books about the area. Yeah.
And they want members. So, their thing is we have all these things you can come look at if you pay the membership fee and the dues every
Right.
year. And so I can see both sides. But the things like, the National Archives and the state archives, especially here in Georgia, they have been working on the digitation project for so many years, which is really helpful in this last year during COVID, because they've been kind of focusing on that, and they've gotten more stuff up that you may not be able to see, because I live like 45 minutes from the location of where the National and the State Archives is. They're in the same parking lot. And, driving down there, you've got to have an appointment to get in. And it's one of these places where you can only take in a notebook and a phone and a pencil. You can't have an ink pen. And so all these different places do different things, to keep their records intact. And then you make appointments to, well, I want to see this really special book. So they take you in this room and they give you the gloves, and you get to do the things that you see on the genealogy shows on TV that look
That's
really cool.
That's fun.
But I've been doing that for a really, really long time. So it's just I found a way to marry it with all my paranormal stuff.
So why paranormal stuff? A lot of people have the interest in the genealogy. I'm a member of 23andMe. I got my DNA tested, but I'm adopted. But why the paranormal stuff? How'd you get started there?
Well, way back in the day, I don't know if they had them out where you grew up, but we had book fairs in elementary school.
You'd be surprised how many times I hear this as a reason. And I agree. You get those books, those books like 10 haunted places around the countries, and you just get sucked in. Is that where you're going with this?
Yeah, it was one very specific book. It was by Larry Kettlecamp, and it was called Haunted Houses. And the cover of the book had a picture of the Lady of Rydam Hall.
Mm-hmm.
And the minute I saw it, I fell in love with it. And I was like, it is going to be my life's mission to take that kind of photograph. Now this was like 1976. So I was 8. And, so that's before the days of, everybody saying everything's fake and all that stuff. So my parents, when I was growing up, when we'd go on summer vacation, it was always somewhere historic. We would spend a week somewhere in and around Georgia, where I would learn something while we were there. And one of the places we always went to is called St. Simon's Island. And they had a battle called the Battle of the Bloody Marsh at Fort Frederica. And it's just, Christ Church is there, and you've got all these, Spanish moss trees over these graves from the 1700s. And, I would spend my summers with whatever camera we were using at the time, real film cameras, to try to get pictures of ghosts. Mm-hmm. And it just went from there. And, it hasn't stopped. It's still my thing to, it's harder now to try to get photographs because cameras are not the same as they were when I was younger. I really enjoyed the film camera aspect better because the digital cameras have proven to make their own ghosts, so to speak. So film was a lot more fun when you get it developed, and you'd have some wispy thing on the side of a tombstone or out on a battlefield or something like that. But that's how I got into it.
Yeah, I always wondered that about cameras. Like, was there a difference between the analog and digital camera when it came to
there's a big difference.
Researching this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you've gotten to the point now where digital camera companies are putting in their instruction manuals why you're getting orbs in your pictures.
Oh, really?
Because I am not an orb person at all. So, I know it's environmental, or it's what you're doing with the camera, or something like that. One of the funny stories that I tell is for my first book, I wanted the cover to be something that was, a picture that was all orbs. And I had a brand new DSLR camera. I couldn't get that camera to make an orb to save my life. I finally had to spray water on the lens. I was shaking, feather dusters in front of it and taking pictures, and the camera was so good it would not make orbs. And I ended up having to go find an old photograph from my very first digital camera back in 1999 to get an actual picture that had all the orbs that I wanted in it for the book cover.
I'd say.
So it's, yeah, cameras now are not, I still prefer film. I would rather use film over or digital any day.
Yeah, I'd say that it's like I'll just start. My wife has me take pictures. I'm terrible at it, and she hates it, but she still has me do it. I think she does it mainly so she can talk crap about how horrible the pictures are. But, like, I'll take the pictures and I'll take a bunch, and she's just all, Why are you taking so many?" Animal, it's just zeros and ones. Just delete it. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter. This isn't film. They'll take 100, and then you pick three, but. Yeah, it's
I was
hard
very
to.
lucky to have parents that did not mind film expense. I cannot tell you how much film I went through. And then, back then we had the cameras that had the flash bulbs on top that you take the picture and then rotate, and you had like four. You could take four with one flash bulb.
Oh yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
that's where the money was in the flash bulbs, not the film.
Oh,
So their thing was, we're gonna let you do as much film as you want if it's during the day. We're not spending the money on flash bulbs.
right. Oh, that's funny. Yeah. So, it says here that you're a true crime buff. Do you find that it's difficult to separate true crime from paranormal when researching, or do you find that there's always a crossover there, or do you have to separate yourself on that?
No, I don't separate myself at all. I think the obsession with true crime is what leads me to decide what I want to research,
Mm-hmm.
whether the case interests me or not. Lizzie Borden was my first
Yeah, that's where I was going to go with
love.
this. And I have I'm like everybody else. I have a big interest, and I find that when we dig into it, it's at least on this mainstream level, Lizzie Borden is not as exciting as I had hoped that she was. So I'm hoping that you can give me some of this
Well,
excitement.
when again, this is back in the 70s, so it's still around the time when I was 8, 9 years old when I was introduced to the Lizzie Borden movie that Elizabeth Montgomery was in.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fascinated, that I don't know if you've ever seen it, but that one scene of her standing there pretty much naked in the wash tub, washing the blood off of her. As an 8-year-old, that fascinated me.
That's
And
disturbing, but go ahead.
well, I'm a disturbing person.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
I know.
so seeing that, and back then it was encyclopedias and going to see if anybody had written books. It wasn't looking up Wikipedia to see what the new theory of the week on her is. It was things that had actually been written, and it was just something that the fact that this woman could do this to her family, why? And then I graduated from that to the Pearl Bryan case, which is one of the chapters in the book. And I knew that case inside and out because of all the research I'd done when I was younger.
Now that's not a name that I'm familiar with. Pearl Bryan.
Okay. Pearl Bryan is the person who is associated, and I say that in Dr. Evil air quotes, with Bobby Mackey's Music World. She's the one that supposedly was murdered and her head was thrown down the well to hell down in the basement in Bobby Mackey's.
Hmm.
And the ghost shows, of course, these were episodes that were aired about this. Mm-hmm. And it was probably, I'm going to say 8-9 years ago that the Bobby Mackey episode aired, and I'm sitting there watching it, and and I was like everybody else, since I've been looking for stuff for so long, when it finally graduated to there were TV shows about it, I was really excited. Mm-hmm. And didn't really see the problems with it at the time. But when I saw the episode on Pearl and they started attributing all this history to her and the town of Wilder, Kentucky, that was either not true, had been picked up from another town, kind of cross-contaminated facts from places. And, because I knew her case so well, I was like, well, if they're doing this to her, what are they doing to other people?
Right.
Fisher at Old Charleston Jail, the Myrtles Plantation, all these places that were big TV episodes, what were they lying about there? So that's where, I got that, and it's like, no, we're going to research all these main places that appear on the TV shows and see what else they're lying about. And that's what I've spent the last 9 years doing.
And have you found, well, let's ask the big question. Have you found that they're wrong a lot?
100% of the time.
Oh, I see.
Well, let's say 99%.
No, I get where you're
found
going.
very few places, like the Villisca Axe Murder House. I don't know if you're familiar with that one.
No.
That's one that they do that they don't misconstrue the history. But most of the others, they're there's always a kernel of truth. It may just be a person's name and not any event. But my thing is, to me, they're disrespecting the dead. They're attributing things to people that they never did. Like with the Conjuring House, if you look at the Bathsheba Sherman case, everything that they've attributed to her, I've proved completely incorrect. And, they have maligned this woman to the point to where, she can't even have a gravestone on her grave anymore because everybody is going to desecrate it and destroy it or vandalize it because of what the books and the movies have said about her.
Now, this is from the Conjuring movie?
Yes.
So, I make this clear to a lot of people. I actually have always had an interest in paranormal. I'm not hugely versed in the real world of paranormal, but I am hugely versed in horror films. So, The Conjuring, I definitely know. So I knew that this was not an accurate portrayal, but you're saying this is nowhere near.
No, nothing they said about her is true, except her name. That's the only thing they got right. She was a farm woman who, was raised in a town in Rhode Island, had an ordinary life, married another farmer, raised a family, Baptist woman, died, was buried. There was nothing extraordinary about her. There is nothing about her that's connected to anything nefarious.
So why the connection? Why they put it together? It was just easy, logistically easy.
You see, and that's something that I don't know because the people that did it are dead now. So we've got no way of knowing why the Warrens came up with that name. Not that they would have ever admitted, that they completely lied about this woman and tried to destroy her reputation. But that, that's where that name came from, was Ed and Lorraine.
Right. And yeah, they have the reputation for some reason. They have a reputation. I've looked into them quite a bit because I enjoyed the movies, and to me, as soon as I started reading about them, I'm just all like, as cool as this would be if it were real, this has BS written all over it, in my opinion.
Well, and it did. One of the things that, and you'll have to forgive me because sometimes I get confused as to what was in the actual movie and what was in the books that was written.
Yeah, no worries.
The girl who grew up in the house. One of the things that the Warrens supposedly pointed out was this murder of Prudence Arnold. That was this horrible murder that took place in that house, and is one of the reasons it was so haunted. Prudence Arnold was murdered over the state line in Massachusetts in her own home. She wasn't in that house. She wasn't on that farm. She wasn't even though she had the same last name as Arnold, she wasn't associated with that family. And it's just things like that, that when I see, you've got this poor girl who had her throat slit by some guy who wanted to take advantage of her and murdered her, then tried to kill himself and couldn't do it because, in his words, it hurt too bad. And then went on to be
that part's probably true.
Yeah. Well, he tried to slit his own throat too, and it's like, no, this hurts. I can't do this.
It was so easy on her. Why is it so hard? Right?
Exactly. So that's I hate to use the word crusade because that can take on so many connotations. But, I feel I owe it to these people that have passed on and cannot stand up for themselves anymore. that are being maligned. Same with Pearl Bryan. The things that they were saying about her and the fact that it was part of a satanic ritual, which, you know, satanic rituals didn't exist in that part of Kentucky in 1896. And
Frankly, I don't think they really exist now.
well, you've got more of a, the internet's a great place for people who are different to get together.
Oh, well, yeah. I think that there's Anton LaVey kind of stuff, but
Yeah.
there's never, like, I don't think, true Satanists, which is a
No.
little disappointing because, I mean, I do this show. I mean, I want to find some real Satanists, but every time I look for them, I can't find them.
If I run across any, I will let you know.
Good.
But it's, a very good example. And one of the things I point out in my book, in the Pearl Bryan chapter, is, the shows all say that her head was thrown down the well to hell. And there is this big hole in Bobby Mackey's basement. And they also say, it was a slaughterhouse. It was never a slaughterhouse. At the time Pearl Bryan was murdered, it was a whiskey distillery. And what had happened is the person that owned the whiskey distillery made a contract with the railroad to dig 3 viaducts from the distillery under the railroad tracks to the Licking River to pump in water for the distillery process. So the hole that everybody keeps talking about is one of those viaducts that's left over from the whiskey distillery.
I see.
So that's just kind of an example of, what's real and what they say on TV.
Yeah, well, how we got here was initially talking about the TV, and it definitely prompts the question of, are these shows and researchers the motivation? Is it that they are just accidentally reporting lie that was built on top of lie, or is the motivation to come up with the lie themselves?
Well, and that's a good question because, it kind of begs the answer, they're lying on purpose, because a lot of this stuff can be found, it's, if the first thing about researching, which supposedly all these shows have researchers,
right.
They would know this stuff because the information's out there. It's not like I dug it up from under a rock or found it in somebody's attic. It's all court documents, newspapers, all public record. So if they're a research worth their salt, then that's got to tell you that they either found this stuff and decided, the story wasn't good enough, or they've, taken things that other people have said. Part of the story with Pearl Bryan is somebody wrote a book in the early 2000s when there was a caretaker there named Carl. And he's dead now, but at the time he was at the place, he was having some horrible things happen, and everybody was convinced he was being possessed by some demonic force that was hanging out in Bobby Mackey's basement. And a person wrote a book and started putting these things about Pearl in there, which, I have proven this is the first time that these things about her were ever said, because every newspaper article from 1896 up through, I'd say, the 1960s that talked about this case, because this was one of the biggest murder cases in the United States. It was bigger than Lizzie Borden, and it went overseas. And part of it was because she was murdered, her head was cut off, and they couldn't identify her. And the way they had to identify her was through her shoes. Her shoes had serial numbers on them, and that's how they finally found out who she was, because she didn't live in Kentucky. She lived in Indiana, and she had no head, and she was pregnant. And so there were all these, this thing was reported on like you wouldn't believe. And all of the sudden, she's part of a satanic ritual, when it was nothing more than, some guy got her pregnant and didn't want her to be pregnant, and he killed her.
Right.
That's what it boils down to.
That's what a lot of them boil down to.
And see, to me, that story is far more fascinating than this made up one of the 2 guys that killed her did it because of a satanic thing. The 2 don't even come close to being interesting to me as far as the satanic stuff. It's
and I understand that you maybe don't know, but I can't help but to be curious as to if if local folklore builds these mistakes or if the researchers build these mistakes, because it seems like a lot of that might come from local folklore, people who don't want to
And it
admit
does.
that young Billy was a rapist or something like that.
Or it's
I don't
kind of
know.
like the telephone, somebody tells somebody else a story, and as it comes down through time, the people change, the circumstances change, because the original person who told the story isn't around anymore to correct somebody's memory.
Mhm.
I don't know that I could 100% tell you verbatim the stories that my grandmother told me when I was 6, 7, 8 years old. I can
Yeah,
remember
of
the
course.
gist, but the facts have, unless it's something that we talked about my entire life, the facts have kind of gone by the wayside. It's just laziness on the part of the researchers for not finding the information that's actually out there. There's always going to be stories that you can't find anything about, and the best you can do is take different versions. You might find somebody who remembers one version from 1960, one that remembers one version from 1970, and kind of try to piece it together. But it's nothing but pure laziness on the show's researchers for or it's like I always say, it's entertainment. It's para entertainment. It's not real, and they're going to do what they can do to get their followers and get their ratings and be done with it. And they're not going to care, what kind of historical fact they ruin in the process.
Right. When I'm by no means a researcher, but when I find out information, I tend to file it in my head under definitely true, probably true, or came from a questionable source, but I still find it interesting. And then
Mhm.
I'll be reciting them later, and I'm not sure if this is true, or I only remember the file tab. I don't remember really where it came from. But in the case of doing this research, are there levels like that? Like, do you like, are public record one thing, and if you found a journal entry another thing, and if you found a note in an attic, is that another level of credibility? Are there credibility levels to the trail that you find?
When I'm doing the actual research, I mean, it kind of depends on where I got the idea that I wanted to look into this to
Mhm.
start with. If it's something in a journal that I found that somebody had mentioned, then the first thing I'm going to do is whatever the fact is, I'm going to see if it's an actual fact.
Well,
Whether
what
that's
defines it as a fact? Being a
well,
public
it's
record?
public record, yeah, whether it was a
Okay.
newspaper or court document, vital record, if there's something that can then prove this fact, even if it's just, okay, I'm going to go look at the census records for this area and see if this person actually lived here at
Right.
that time.
Mhm.
And then I tend to go down a rabbit hole. I'll find another fact in whatever I'm looking at that sends me in 12 other different directions. But it's, personal written information as far as journals, letters, things like that, to me are always going to be more valuable to me than actual public record, because public record can be wrong.
Right.
You can take death certificates or as a very good example. One of the things I did when I was researching Waverly Hills to prove that 60,000 people did not die there was I went through every death certificate um, for the time that Waverly was open, because when you make a death certificate, you have to put where the person died. So I went and picked out all the ones in that part of Kentucky for that time period, pulled out every one for that had listed for every person. But when you look at a death certificate, there's a part on there. I don't know if you've ever actually paid attention to one or seen one, but there's a part where an informant gives information. And that information usually includes the parents' names of the person who died, where those parents were born, that kind of thing. And those can be wrong because the information is only as good as the informant. So you can have all this other information on the death certificate that's correct, but the person's mother, it says, they were born in Georgia. Well, they were really born in Ireland, you
Mhm.
know, because the informant didn't know. census records are the same thing. Since census records started in the 1790s, if you weren't home when the census taker came by, they asked your neighbors about you, what your name was, what were your kids' names, how old were your kids? Do you know how old, when your neighbors' kids were born? Do you
Oh,
know their full names? Do you know? But they're asking, neighbors for this
right.
information so they don't have to come back. So it's not uncommon to follow one person through the census records and find out that they're, you know, okay, you do a census, say in 1850, and they're 30 years old. Well, in 1860, you would think they would be 40 years old because it's 10 years later. Well, it's actually got their age as 5 years younger than they were on the previous census 10 years before because the informant didn't know the information.
That makes sense.
So, long story short, I am always going to value handwritten things from the people that were actually involved over public record. Public
Right.
record is always going to be at the bottom.
Yeah, that makes sense. My dad had two birth certificates. Basically, he was adopted also, and
Mhm.
they messed it up somehow, and his birth certificate actually said he was 3 months younger than he actually was.
Right, right.
And so he always joked about having two birthdays because he
Yeah,
ended up over time having two sets of paperwork.
yeah. I mean, because even public, employees do make mistakes when they type that stuff up, and depending on what time period you're looking at, if it's handwritten, sometimes it's misread. When you got to the fact, the point in time when you had typewriters and computers, you've got data entry errors. So, I always say take your public records with a grain of salt
Mhm.
because some of that stuff could be wrong.
What's your take on psychics? These shows always take a psychic in and they always put a lot into it. And it seems like they're sort of leaning on the psychic to add some drama to the show. And I talked to some paranormal researchers that, put a lot of put a lot into the psychic, and then others that just don't want them there because they feel that they get in the way of the deal. What's your take on the psychic with this paranormal investigation?
I totally believe in the gift of mediumship,
Hmm.
100%. Now, as far as having one on an actual investigation, I don't tend to want to do that. I would rather go and do my thing and then possibly have the person come in and do their thing. Kind of like Dead Files. The way that they do that. Amy does one thing and Steve does another, and at the end they meet and see if their information coincides. To
Oh,
me,
that's a
that's
good idea. I haven't
what,
seen that show, but that's a good idea.
yeah. He's a retired police detective, and he does all the historical research and talks to the family and gets the stories, and she's the medium that goes in and does sees whatever dead people she sees,
Hmm.
and they see if his facts back up what she found. And to me, that's the way to do it. I wouldn't necessarily want one with me, um, because I think that would color whatever I was doing in the investigation.
Right, right. I interview quite a bit of people who research UFOs and stuff like that, and there seems to be a big rift there between people who are sort of like spiritually investigating UFOs and then these nuts and bolts researchers, which it kind of feels like you are. The
Right.
ones that are all about chasing down the paperwork and following the paper trail from the government and so on and so forth. And they tend to butt heads a little bit. But I like the way you're talking about it is to separate it and then put it together after the fact and see if there's any.
To me, that's the most logical. Like, there's no reason not to have both sides.
Mhm.
It's just, the appropriate place and time for those sides to meet.
Yeah. Um, so do you actually go in and do these investigations?
I used to. I don't do residential anymore. My husband and I, we did that for a very long time. And because it's gotten so popular and cool to have quote unquote ghost hunters in your house,
Right. Mhm.
we were getting way too many people that were just in it for the fun. It wasn't because they were actually experiencing a problem.
Oh, really?
Yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
I
So
guess when you don't, were you charging?
no,
Oh,
no,
all the
never.
more reason for them to call because they're just all, oh, let's get drunk and call a ghost researcher to walk through
Yeah,
our house, right?
and I had some people that would hear what I would do, and it's like their thing would be, well, I don't necessarily think I have anything paranormal in my house, but I would love to know what history you could dig up on who used to live there, and I have no problem with that because they're upfront and honest, right?
Sure, sure.
And I love to research. I just all the I don't charge anybody for all the research I do either. It's just something that I love so much. Give me a puzzle and let me see if I can figure it out for you. Um, so we only do historical locations now, which is mainly why we got into it to start with, because that's what we wanted to do was the big historical locations, but nobody wanted people doing that on their property that they'd never heard of or didn't have any kind of reputation or references, or because so many ghost hunters are going in and destroying property, literally burning it to the ground in cases in Louisiana. There was a group of people that got mad they couldn't find any paranormal stuff, so they sat around in the house, decided to get high, and ended up burning the entire 200-year-old mansion down. The park services have stopped letting people come in because they were doing things on the property they didn't like. So that's why we started doing residential, so we could gain a portfolio and give ourselves a name that people knew. Oh, Shannon wants to come do this. We know she's good. We know she will keep anything confidential, that type of thing. So we went from residential to actually doing state parks here in Georgia. We've done several state parks because we've gotten called in. A lot of the state parks here have been built on old Southern plantation properties or places where there were Indian massacres in the 1700s. And, there was activity going on. And
Right.
it got to the point to where guests at the park were actually calling, the head DNR office and saying, I got attacked by a ghost in your cabin. What are you going to do about it?
What
So,
can you do about it? What are you gonna do about it? What kind of
the parks started calling us in, and we've done several
who
parks.
are you gonna call is the question, right?
Exactly. So we just kind of built it from there, and then once we got to the level that I wanted to be at as far as our reputation, I'm like, we don't need the residential anymore. Now I'll take an odd one here and there if somebody calls me and say, I've got this friend that really needs help. This is what's going on in their house. And then, because I have a ritual I make the homeowner go through. I make them keep a journal of what's going on in the house, and I make them take detailed notes to tell me. And if they're actually willing to go through all of this, then
Right.
I will help them.
Yeah, that seems fair. So has this question is more specifically for you, but if the answer is no, I'm wondering if it's the case with anybody else. Have any of these researches ever yielded the results of solving a real world crime that wasn't solved prior?
Not that I'm aware of, no. I'm
Because
not going to say it hasn't happened, but
right, but there's no
not to
famous
my knowledge.
right. Because it seems like, digging in cold cases, lots of changes in technology. It seems like that day will come where somebody is going to solve a crime that,
Great.
yeah.
Yeah, I can see that happening. And it would be great if it did. It's one of these cases or things of, I guess maybe the research that you do, maybe you could find something that somebody else hadn't figured out, or you could put something together. When you go into someone's home and you're investigating, you do get kind of, what's the word? In their personal space.
Mhm.
You're in all parts of the house. I've been in attics, I've been in basements, I've been in crawl spaces. So, who's to say that, I couldn't go in a crawl space one day and find a dead body that had been there for,
All right.
however, that's not a
Terrifying.
historic, what I would say a historical dead body.
No, I know what you mean. They wouldn't send it in the crawl space if they put
Yeah.
it there. Right.
you
Yeah.
know. So, it could happen. And,
Mhm.
I would not be at all surprised to hear one day that it did, but I don't know that it's happened.
Now, your interest, you say it peaked with the book at the book fair and such, but have you had any of your own experiences doing
Oh,
these
yeah.
researches?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm a 100%, I am a skeptic first always, because I'm always going to look for the normal before I look at the paranormal.
Right.
One of the examples I always use is, it's a personal one, is for years, it took us years to figure this out. When the ice maker would go off in our refrigerator, the whole house would shake, and it would sound like, somebody was beating on the walls. And when that happens at 3 o'clock in the morning and it wakes you up,
Right.
okay, what demons have descended on my house, right? Turns out it was there in the line going to the septic tank. When we had the septic tank pump, that stopped. So, as we always try to teach people, the first thing we look at is their plumbing.
Right.
Um,
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
People don't realize when you've got, fireplaces in different rooms of the house, the downdrafts will make doors shut. Things like that. So that's what, we always go in and look at that stuff first. But yes, I have had many, many experiences in places that we have been. I've heard things, I've been touched, I have taken what I consider to be photographic evidence one time in my entire life. Out of the thousands of pictures I have taken, I consider I've done it once.
Well, those are the two questions that are bouncing in my head. One is, what's the scariest thing that you've ever found yourself in? And the other is, what's the most compelling piece of evidence that you've ever come up with? Let's start with that one, because you say you've taken the one photograph.
Yeah.
And I assume that's the most compelling piece of physical evidence of proof of the afterlife to you. I mean, I understand that that's,
It's the most compelling of something I can hand to somebody else, because you can't validate or invalidate personal experiences.
Right. Yes.
So putting all those aside, when you're talking about actual something that you can show somebody or have somebody listen to, I've gotten a couple of EVPs, which to me cannot be disproved. And the photograph that I took in an old Stagecoach Inn, it's actually a series of photographs where you can see something moving. And we spent months, because we had permanent access to this place, trying to recreate that and make it happen again. And we never could. And there were 4 people in the room when it happened. So, and I've had other people, who are skeptics as well. They can't explain the photographs either. So to me, that's the one thing I always wanted to achieve that I did achieve. Scary moment, I don't scare. So that's, I could say one of the most interesting moments that I had. We were at one of the state parks, the one that I was talking about, and it was built on an old slave plantation. And we had been called in because a white woman, had reported being choked, held down in her bed and choked, and then grabbed from behind and around her throat and choked when she was in the kitchen. So we went down there and I thought I was so smart. We have digital cameras that we use. And anytime we would buy a digital camera, we would always bring it home, set it up, tape us sleeping in the bedroom so we could see how it works, what affects it, the weird things the cats do while you're sleeping, that kind of thing.
Sure.
So we took the camera, we went to bed, we plugged it in, you knew exactly, you had the angle that we wanted, and it was on the bed that this was reported to have happened in, and my husband and I were sleeping in that bed. And I remember I woke up, it was like 6:13 in the morning. And I woke up because I'd felt something grab my foot. And it's kind of did my husband kick me? I'm trying to figure out what happened. And, his legs are on the other side of the bed. And while I'm trying to figure this out, the comforter on top of the bed got yanked completely off the bed from the bottom and ended up on the floor. Well, we're the only ones in this room. And I'm jumping up and down and I'm so excited because I'm like, we've got the video camera going. We got this actually happening on camera, right?
Mm-hmm.
This happened at 6:13. The camera cut off at like 6:02. And that happened both nights, 2 nights in a row in this place. That's what happened. The camera cut off before that happened. So, I've had interesting experiences. But I like I say, I don't scare at all. None of this is ever scary to me because it's more, I approach it as more of I'm there to help the dead person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not there to help the family that's living in the house, because if there is honestly a dead person in your house, that means they haven't crossed over. And that is what I want to do, is get that spirit to move on.
So you don't think we have much to fear?
The dead person, I help the living person.
You don't think that's all right? So you don't think we have much to fear from ghosts or anything other than our own feelings about it? They're not going to hurt us.
In my opinion, no. Now, there are hundreds of TV shows that will tell you differently.
Mm-hmm.
There are other people that, feel that they have been physically harmed by dead people. And I'm not at all going to say that they're wrong. There's people that have been reported pushed downstairs. There's people that's been reported held down in their bed. So whether it's physical or psychological torment, I've never experienced that myself. And most of the dead people that I have run into, I always say, have you got children?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
3.
I always tell people, it's like, when you've got a toddler who's 2 years old and you try to go to the bathroom and you shut that door, that toddler is on the other side of that door trying to do everything possible to get your attention.
Yeah, ain't that the truth?
And I liken that to dead people. It's like when you die, you keep the same personality you had when you were alive, except you turn into a 2-year-old. And if you think there is someone in your vicinity that notices your presence, whether they can actually hear you, if you try to talk to them, or they just notice the things you're doing, they're wanting help. And, to me, that's the job of a paranormal investigator, is to help that dead person go where they need to go.
Right.
And get out of the living space and leave the living people alone.
Your story about sleeping with your husband and the blanket coming off. I had this dream one night that I was running, and I was just running as fast as I could. And I slowly woke up to someone yelling, "Ow, ow, ow." And I realized that I was laying in bed on my side running. And in the process of doing so, I was kicking my sleeping wife repeatedly, and she's all "ow, ow," in her half sleep, when you
happen,
yeah.
But you've got people that would take that experience and try to make it something it's not. Try to turn it paranormal, or try to like your wife woke up. Let's say that she didn't actually wake up while you were doing that, but she woke up with bruises the next morning from where you kicked her.
Right. She did.
So she's like, I wake up, I've got all these bruises. I have no knowledge of where that came from.
Right.
Something demonic must have happened to me in my sleep.
Right. Your husband, was he always into this, or did you convert him, or did you guys find each other through this?
Well, no, he's was into it as a teenager. He kind of where we live, there's always these places where kids go, that are supposedly haunted, or those places where you leave your car and it'll have handprints, or it'll move, or some haunted abandoned house that somebody got murdered in, and kids go to scare each other to do these things.
I would have, yeah.
And he was not much of a believer, but he did want to, his thing was he was always going to protect the girls, because he's been a ladies' man since he was born.
Right.
So he was going to protect the girls. Well, he had an actual experience one of these times that scared the crap out of him, and made him more interested in it. So he already had a deep-seated interest in it by the time he and I met. And so it's just something we had in common.
Well, I'm always curious, like, about how family members handle this sort of thing. Like, do your family's members think you guys are nuts?
Well, it depends on which family member you're talking
The
about. I mean,
religious ones probably do.
um, I always laugh and say, my mother is, always the first one to tell me, if I'm talking to dead people, I'm talking to demons. But when I come back from an investigation, she was always the first one to, oh, what happened? What kind of evidence did you
Right.
get? What did you find? Did you, so we've been very lucky, his parents and my parents have supported us. Like I say, my mother, with me growing up, did this with me every summer when I was looking for ghosts. So she knows it's something I'm interested in. It's just, you've always kind of got that battle. The Bible says one thing, but when your daughter's doing something else,
Right.
You want to know both sides. So.
Right. Yeah, of course. Well, we don't have too long until the end here. What's the best place for people to get in touch with you? Is it the paranormalgenealogist.com? Is that the best place to send people?
Actually, I don't do a whole lot with the website anymore. Looking me up on Facebook under Shannon Bradley Byers and sending me a message will be your best way.
Okay.
I do have a paranormal genealogist Facebook page, so you can find me there as well. I don't do a whole lot on it anymore. It's just, there's so many of those pages that it got hard trying to keep it relevant with what I did.
Right.
So, I'd rather have one-on-one conversations with people. So I have no problem with them finding my personal Facebook page and sending me a message and saying, hey, I'd like to know about this. Where can I find your books? That kind of stuff. So yeah, just look me up under Shannon Bradley Byers on Facebook.
And where can they find your books? Their best bet to look you up on Amazon?
Amazon has it. iTunes has it as an ebook. I have ebooks in hard copies on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and then iTunes has it as a ebook there as well.
All right. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I have had quite a few ghost researchers, paranormal researchers, and you're the only one that I can say is so much in the nuts and bolts category. I really like this genealogy angle of going at it. I think it's super interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much.
Yeah. All right. You've been listening to Radio Wasteland with Shannon Bradley Byers. Be sure to look her up on Facebook, Shannon Bradley Byers. Check out her books on Amazon. And if you can't find any of those links, I bet you those links are on paranormalgenealogist.com.
They are.
All right. Thank you again.